Welcome, everybody. My name is Tricia Martin, and I'm the Director of Visitor Engagement here at Black Tower Gardens. And I am thrilled that you all are here and interested in this topic. I want to give a huge shout out to our members for all that they do to support the gardens and keep the gardens growing. And I know we have some really long-time members that go back, so it's great to see families here that have been supporting the gardens. And actually, recently, I was just thinking of a lady whose family is here, Connie Van Hook. And she was here in the 90s when I worked here back in the 90s as a volunteer. So people really contribute in lots and lots of ways. And we are incredibly, incredibly grateful and lucky to have this amazing place. So of course, this was envisioned by Edward Bach. And it was his dream to create a bird sanctuary. And it's amazing all that's happened subsequently in the decades, because that was back in 1929. So I wanted to just share some words with you that I read of Edward Bach's from his book called Twice 30, because I just loved the language that he used. So he wrote that preservation of the citizens of the world of fur and feather, who can only ask for preservation and perpetuation by soft-eyed appeal and ravishing song. So lovely, lovely words as we begin this session. And I want to start, unfortunately, with a heavy heart, and I want to recognize a giant in the field of conservation in Florida, and especially here on the Lake Wales Ridge, who recently passed. And he is Sahas's predecessor, Dr. Reed Bowman. So sadly, Reed Bowman passed unexpectedly last month, when he had just retired and was enjoying his status as emeritus. And Reed contributed so much, and of course building on the legacy of all the incredible work that Archbold Biological Station has done. So from identifying the places where scrub jays still exist and how that work helped to create a map identifying the important places that needed to be protected, and that fueled conservation work and the creation of maps and the ability to get these lands protected thanks to state and federal programs. So what an incredible legacy. Reed also helped us to start a citizen science project monitoring scrub jays called a Jay Watch. And then, of course, his work mentoring so many students and scientists. So I really just wanted to mention that and honor Reed for his contribution to conservation and to science. We are really, really thrilled about this program today and thrilled to have Sahas here. And we are doing something a little different. So we have a whole tech component, and our tech manager is our education manager, Cindy Berman. And so Cindy, did you want to say a few things?
Sure, I'll go ahead and explain. So when you guys registered, we asked if you already had a question you wanted to ask. So we made sure that it was preloaded on here, and also if you, during the process, had any other questions, maybe didn't want to interrupt, or maybe just didn't want to ask in front of everyone, you're welcome to scan the QR code or go to slido.com, and you can submit your questions live, and they'll show up on the screen, and Sahas can answer them as they appear. And once we get them answered, I'll just go ahead and check them off, and we can just keep moving through that. So if you have any questions on that, you guys should be able to just pull up your camera on your phone, and you can scan any of the barcodes around the room or the one at the front, and it should work from where you're sitting. It has a pretty good reach. You'll scan it, and it'll pop up, and then it'll bring you to the website. Just click on the website, and you'll be on this page. And then once we move to the Q&A portion, you'll be able to submit a question there. Do you have any questions on there?
And also the old-fashioned way works too. So you can just raise your hand, ask a question, So we're good. I also wanted to give you a sneak preview because I know some people were saying, oh, I've been hearing about Archbold and I've never been there. And Sahas brought some wonderful handouts, the great story of M34, the bear. And so the new director of conservation, Josh Daskins, will be coming here the end of November, so November 29th. So be sure to put that in your calendar and come to that if you can. So let's proceed, and I wanted to make sure I got this right because he's got such an amazing bio, so I'm going to violate my own edict of not to read because this is just so wonderful. So recently, Dr. Sahas Barve, who is the avian ecologist at Archbold Biological Station, he was awarded the 2023 Maxwell Hanrahan Award in Field Biology, which is incredibly prestigious. Only 5 are given out worldwide. So huge kudos. And so these awards are in recognition of early career researchers who bring diverse perspectives to science and show exceptional talent and curiosity in field-based research. Sahas is following 16 years of varied field experience, and I wanted to, like I said, make sure I got this right. Listen to some of these cool things he's done. He's tracked king cobras through high elevation or throughout steamy jungles of South India. He studied high elevation birds in the frozen Himalayas and followed the complicated social lives of acorn woodpeckers in California's oak savanna. So from there, he came here to the Lake Wales Ridge to be the avian ecologist at Archbold Biological Station, and we give you a warm welcome to Backyard Gardens.
Thank you so much.
Sahas Barve.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Tricia, for those kind words and great introduction. So, I'm the program director of avian ecology at Archbold Biological Station, and I have some materials about what we do at Archbold. I wanted to quickly do one slide about the avian ecology program. So we do work on Florida scrub jays. So I lead one of the longest running continuous studies of any bird in the world. So we, depending on how you want to count it, we are either the second or the third longest running study in the world. And so Florida scrub jays have been studied at Archbold since 1969, and I'm the third person to take that over. Just like Tricia said, we sadly lost Reed Bowman, who was my predecessor. And yeah, Reed was just a fantastic person, great mentor. And so I want to continue his legacy by studying Florida scrub jays not only at Archbold, but we also study Florida scrub jays all throughout the Lake Wales Ridge. We work with Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission to survey and study Florida scrub jays on their lands and provide management recommendations of how to manage landscapes for maintaining populations of Florida scrub jays. We also have tours, so people can come visit on the weekends. We also have special programs in the bird lab. We had last year, for example, that photo right there is we have a small museum. So we had people coming on Darwin Day in February, on Charles Darwin's birthday. And we not only talked to them about Florida scrub jays, but also about birds in general. And so I hope you consider visiting Archbold. It's about an hour and 15 minutes from here. So, and finally, a quick plug about a event this weekend that is being put together by the education department at Archbold, and it's a night hike in the scrub. And again, now that Cindy has told you how to scan QR codes, there's a QR code on there also, and you can, if you're interested, please do visit. With that, yeah, let's start. Tricia, how do we start? Do we start with a question that?
Start with some of the questions that were submitted, and
Perfect.
we'll kind of get the ball rolling.
All right, sounds good. Are hummingbirds seen in Central Florida or in the garden specifically? So yes and yes. Garden. So I looked up. I'm sure many of you have heard of this. There's a beautiful citizen science project called eBird, where you can submit your own observations of birds. And so hummingbirds, ruby-throated hummingbirds, which are the only hummingbirds that are found in this area typically, very commonly, are found in Central Florida all throughout the year. Most of them go down to the Yucatan Peninsula to winter, but some of them are found here. And hummingbirds do this a lot. So on the west coast, there's another species of hummingbird which is very common. It's called the Allen's hummingbird, and they're also really pretty with completely pink heads with these really nice structural colors. And there's been a consistent pattern of, as the number of people feeding hummingbirds has increased, the number of Allen's hummingbirds staying back and overwintering on the west coast and not going down to Mexico like they historically used to do, is also increasing. So similar things can happen with the ruby-throated hummingbird as well, and it looks like if you go on eBird and look at where those birds are being reported from, they're often from people's backyards. So it sounds like some birds don't want to fly across the Gulf of Mexico and instead just want to hang out in Central Florida. And so they will do that, and if people continue to feeding hummingbirds predictably, then some individuals might stay back as well. If there are any follow-up questions, please raise your hand and I can answer.
So they cross the Gulf, they don't go around the Gulf.
Yes, so they do cross the Gulf, and that's I know, exactly. So animal migration is absolutely crazy. So because going around the Gulf takes a lot more time and distance, and so cutting across the Gulf is much, much easier. So they do fly non-stop. And there is, you're absolutely right. There's no resting place between the Gulf. There is some birds called blackpoll warblers. I don't know if you guys have seen blackpoll warblers. They're a little rare in this region, but they breed in boreal Canada, and they winter in the Amazon jungle and so they actually fly non-stop. So they cross into the Atlantic Ocean around North Carolina-ish. Because if you look at the map of North America, the straight line distance is shortest from North Carolina. If you go straight down in one straight line, you hit the Amazon or northern South America. And so instead of curving down, they just fly straight over the ocean. And earlier this year, there was a really cool study in a very prestigious journal called Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, where they put blackpoll warblers in these wind tunnels and let them fly, and it's kind of cruel, but they just wanted to see how long they can fly. And multiple blackpoll warblers flew for over 28 hours non-stop. And initially what was considered a big problem for birds, and I'm sure you've heard this with birds like red knots or birds that stop over sites, is birds need to put on a lot of fat to provide for the energy to fly these long distances. And so before they start migrating, they'll often fatten up and then push and fly nonstop. What they found with this study is actually that those blackpoll warblers, their fat reserves are fine, but their muscles were really, really in bad shape. And so it totally depends on what route the bird takes and how long it has to fly and how bad the winds are. But it's not just about how much fat those birds have, but also about how much wear and tear on the muscle there is. But yeah, birds, incredible animals. So again, to put that into a context, a blackpoll warbler is about 12 grams, which is about two teaspoons of sugar. And so two teaspoons of sugar worth of animal flying non-stop from North Carolina to northern South America. Yeah.
What's their lifespan?
Blackpoll warblers actually have a relatively long lifespan. So I think there are individuals known that are 8-9 years old. So they do this, they fly back and forth 8 or 9 times in their lives, which is, yeah, pretty incredible. Do Cooper's hawks migrate? Yes and no. So it depends on where you are as a Cooper's hawk. Cooper's hawks show, or all accipiters show a very huge diversity of migration. Some birds will stay resident all year round in places where there is food all year round. Other birds will migrate far distances, and Cooper's hawks are known to migrate to Central America. I'm sure you've seen videos of birds from a place called Veracruz in South America, where that's where they come into land from, again crossing the Gulf of Mexico, and you see thousands and thousands of hawks passing through Veracruz on a given day in peak migration. And so not only Cooper's hawks, but sharpshins also migrate, as do red tails and all these Swainsons and short-tailed, and a bunch of hawks migrate. Do all birds fly south for the winter, or are there some birds that hibernate? That's a great question. Whoever asked that question, great. If you're here, that's a great question. Because for the longest time, people thought that European people thought that swallows actually hibernate under lakes in the winter. And so they realized that you don't see barn swallows in your village in the winter, and so they thought that, oh, I guess they are just sleeping under the water, because they magically appear one day in our backyards again. And so that was a thought for hundreds of years. And one of the things that actually started migration studies was, there's another bird that's common in Europe called the white stork. It's about the same size as the wood stork that we have here. And white storks very commonly come back into European villages, especially in Germany, and nest on people's houses. So they'll nest on the chimneys of people's houses. And so one day, someone noticed a white stork that had come and started breeding on their house had something lodged in its throat. And the bird was still fine, going about its daily business. And then someone put binoculars on that bird and realized that it was a spearhead that had gone through and through the bird's neck and had come out the other side. The bird had survived somehow. So they caught the bird, and they got the spearhead out, and then they asked an anthropologist to sort of tell them where that spear could have come from. And that anthropologist thankfully knew that those kinds of spears are only made in Africa. And so this bird could have only gotten that spear lodged in its neck if it had been to Africa. And so people are like, oh, maybe white storks are migrating to Africa in the winter. That's why we don't see them. So now we, of course, have really, really cool techniques to study bird migration. We have GPS tags, we have satellite tags. We actually have, we were supposed to get a small part of the International Space Station, but that mission never went up, so it's not been deployed yet. But we'll be tracking birds from the International Space Station in the near future as well. Most birds do fly south, but or a majority of birds fly south, but a lot of birds actually have the ability to just stay back, right? So I don't know, have any of you lived above the Mason-Dixon line ever? Yes, some of you, right? And you know that there are birds around in the winter, right? So a lot of birds migration is a lot of work. You have to fly a long time to get to the warm place. And so a lot of birds just do something else. They either cache food for the winter, or they start sleeping in holes. So chickadees and woodpeckers rarely ever migrate because they live in a nice cozy tree hole at night, and they're not as cold. A lot of chickadees store thousands and thousands of seeds for the winter, and then they have the ability to actually go and remember locations of those thousands of seeds, so they can get back to it and eat them. So it's not all birds fly south for the winter, but many do, and to varying distances.
So Sahas, I have kind of a follow-up.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the swallowtail kite and this particular pattern?
Yeah, so swallowtail kites, as I'm sure you know this. When do you guys start seeing swallowtail kites? Here. I'm sure there are some birders. March, April, okay. Yeah, so, and when do they leave? July. Cool. So where do you think they go? North? They go south. So yeah, so they do go to South America, and yeah, so they come and breed in Florida and in some other southern states, and then they fly back down in the early fall. And if you go to Colombia, to Ecuador, to Venezuela, to Peru in the winter, there are swallowtail kites everywhere. So they are a very common bird. Yes.
So they leave here in July and start migrating at that time?
So yes and no. So they migrate. They first do what is called staging. So a lot of birds will. I'm sure you've also heard there are local congregations of swallowtail kites. So there are places in Florida, in this area actually, where swallowtail kites congregate by the thousands, and then they hang out, and then they all fly together. So by July they start sort of having those congregations, and by late July, August, they're actually flying south. And you can, again, if you go to eBird and look at the data, you can actually see that migration. You can see when swallowtail kites are moving down, and the first records, because there are eBirders all around the world. So they are tracking people. Like this year, when I was now that I live at Archbold, I have a small, what is called a birding patch that I bird in regularly, and I try to log the first palm warbler I see, of the winter. And so there are birders like me all over the world, and you can tell by August you start seeing those first records of swallowtail kites in South America. Do flamingos reject old members of their flock? That's a great question. Well, the answer is we don't know whether they are rejecting old members or the old members are rejecting themselves. A lot of times, so animal sociality is very complex, and oftentimes we don't know why animals behave the way they do, and that's why I think I can keep studying scrub jay behavior for the rest of my life, because it's just so complex. Animals might seem to be rejected, but they might just be lagging behind because they're ill or because they're injured. They might be social outcasts also. So there's not in flamingos per se, but there are other species where they, like, if you've spited the dominant bird in the group, you'll be driven out and you'll be kept out, or birds will be driven out in times of drought. So this other bird that I studied before, the acorn woodpecker, they also do this thing called cooperative breeding, also meaning Florida scrub jays are also cooperative breeders, where chicks or fledglings from this year will continue to stay with their family and help raise their siblings next year. So they are basically older siblings that help raise their younger siblings. And the parents, of course, don't mind that, because they're getting, it's called load lightening in scientific terms, but basically they're helping around the house while they're also living there. But when in times of drought, when there is very little food left on the territory, acorn woodpecker parents will start kicking out their adult helpers. So these older children that are staying back are called helpers, and it's all driven by food. So if the breeders think that they don't have enough food anymore, and then they have these grown-up kids from last year just still hanging out, not moving out, they'll kick them out. So again, it's in some ways very anthropomorphic, but it's and also often driven by the same motives. What is the status of scrub jay in Central Florida? That's a great question. Thank you again for asking that, because Florida scrub jays, again, many of you probably know, are down to about 10% of their historical populations. So there were 90% more Florida scrub jays at the start of the 1900s. And that's largely because scrub jays love upland habitats where we love to build houses and golf courses. And so they live in this very, very special habitat called the Florida scrub. And they're very, very finicky in the sense that they not only obviously don't live in houses and on golf courses, but they also hate fire-suppressed habitats. So again, Florida is well known for its natural fire-dominated ecosystems, and fire is a very, very common natural phenomenon in this region. And so what happens is when there's a natural fire, it burns through the oak scrub and starts new growth. And with a lot of these oak scrub patches that are surrounded by development, we suppress fire because we don't want a giant wildfire in our backyard, which is understandable. But what that means is the habitat in ecological terms goes from being a scrub jay habitat to being a blue jay habitat. Blue jays love taller trees, love living in forests. And so as soon as if you live in a backyard with scrub jays and blue jays, keep an eye out on how often you see scrub jays versus blue jays. If the day it starts tilting in the blue jay direction, that's when you need a fire really badly to keep those scrub jays back in your in your neighborhood. And so fire suppression and just direct conversion is causing a lot of problems and is leading to the downfall of scrub jays. So what is the status? The status is that we have several large populations of scrub jays that are sort of stable, several small populations which are absolutely essential to maintain genetic connectivity and reduce the inbreeding in those large populations. And those small populations are very, very important and need to be conserved using really, really probably dynamic, innovative techniques, because we often can't burn the habitat to keep it the way the scrub jays like. So for example, scrub jays love scrub habitat that's more than 3 years after a fire and less than 12 years after a fire. So they love that in-between habitat. Painted buntings. Yeah, does anyone get painted buntings in their backyard? Oh, yeah. All right. Nice. That's like my feeder goals for this year, my bird feeder goals for this year is to attract a painted bunting. But painted buntings are, of course, I'm sure, beautiful. And they also migrate to Central and South America. But they are all, so two things are happening. One is their habitats in Central and South America are going down. So there is a lot of deforestation happening in Central and South America, which is sort of contributing to the loss in wintering ground habitat availability. But also there's tremendous trade in caged birds, and they disproportionately target male painted buntings because the females, as I'm sure you know, are not as colorful. So there is a lot of illegal trade in wildlife for male painted buntings to be kept as caged birds. It's lots of people who have want to have beautiful caged birds. Painted buntings are a nice example. And so there might be a lot of females in the habitat, but not a lot of males. And so those sex ratios are being affected because the males are disproportionately caught. Yeah.
I assume you're on eBird too.
Yes.
Talk about it. When I report painted buntings on eBird,
Uh-huh.
they don't show up on eBird.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Exactly. So there's a lot of birds, species on eBird that are sort of sensitive species. And eBird has filters where they'll tell you the general region where that bird was sighted, but not the actual location. Yes.
They actually sent me an email said, "Don't say where you saw it."
Right.
Oh, really? Yeah. Great.
They don't put it on
Yeah.
social media.
Perfect. Yeah. Yes.
I'm very interested in the top question.
Uh-huh. Oh, well, I don't know. So my research over the past 15 years on birds has focused on two things. One is physiology, and the other is behavior. So, and those two are probably, and hence I'm a little biased towards those two topics about ornithology. And I'll give you a quick example of why understanding bird physiology is really important. Or really interesting. when I was doing my field research, PhD research in the Himalayas, I was, there was one morning when I was walking up, I was at about 10,000 feet above sea level, and I was walking through this beautiful spruce forest. There was snow on the ground, and I had like multiple layers of down and all that. And I was trying to look at how birds forage. So I was really interested in, when it's really cold out, what are the techniques that birds are using to eat, what are they eating, etc., etc. And so for the first half hour, I didn't even see any birds. So it was really early in the morning. I was out trying to find birds. And then I suddenly see this tiny bird. It's called a gold crest. Gold crests are very similar and look almost identical to golden crowned kinglets in North America. They're the same genus, Regulus, and found, but the sort of Eurasian version, the European and Asian version of golden crowned kinglets. So as soon as I see this gold crest, I'm like, finally, some data. I took my hand out of my mitt and started writing, and my hand immediately froze because it was like minus 10 degrees C, which is about minus 15 Fahrenheit. Oh, no, that's not true. Is it 20 something Fahrenheit? Yeah. So it was 20 degrees Fahrenheit, the thing that you all probably come here to escape. And so my hand went numb right away. And then I realized that most birds maintain a core temperature, their heart temperature, at 40 degrees C. Okay, we keep it at 37.6 degrees C, birds keep it at 40 degrees C. And that bird, the gold crest, or similar to golden crown kinglets, is about 6 grams in weight, which is again 1 teaspoon of sugar. The bird is keeping a difference of, that's 110, right? So 110 degrees Fahrenheit and inside its body, and outside its body, which is less than an inch away from its heart, because there's just its heart, its skin, and feathers. It's maintaining that 90 degree Fahrenheit difference all day long, constantly. And even if they come down, so if they come down from 40 C to 37 C, birds start going into shock. So they get, I'm blanking on the word, what we get when we get really cold. Hypothermia, there we go. And so they start going to hypothermic shock as soon as they even drop down to 37 C. So these tiny birds are doing these incredible, so they might not be flying thousands of miles, but they're living in these extremely cold places. Gold crests don't cache food, don't live in cavities, and yet survive some of these amazingly extreme weather. So gold crest per se, I think, is the toughest bird in the world out there, because they are resident on the island of Iceland, and they are resident even north of Iceland in northern Sweden, where you can imagine in the winter they have maybe 15 minutes to feed, maybe an hour to feed. And so they feed for 1 hour and they fast 23 hours. So if anyone's doing intermittent fasting here, those birds are doing that all winter long, and doing that when they're only 6 grams in weight. So that's why I think understanding what physiology, how physiology works for birds is important. I think it's also obviously important because we are doing the opposite. We are heating the planet up, and that's causing a lot of, as temperatures rise and extreme temperature events increase, we need to understand how birds are going to cope with those challenges. It's only not just the cold, but also, especially here, for a lot of birds in Florida, it's heat. So we need to understand how birds are sort of coping with high heat and what behaviors they use, and that's something I want to study with Florida scrub jays. The other thing I love studying is behavior, and more importantly, social behavior. And one of the coolest things that you can witness out there, and this sort of happens both in Florida. So I'll tell you 2 quick nuances about Florida scrub jays and acorn woodpeckers. So acorn woodpeckers also live in family groups, male and female breeders. If the male or the female breeder dies, then there is what is called a breeder vacancy is opened up, right? So that there's a territory, they have a huge larder of acorns, and suddenly some male, if it's a male vacancy or a female vacancy, a female can move in and become the breeder there. Because those territories are so sought out, multiple coalitions of females will come and fight each other until one coalition beats all other coalitions. So there are up to 50 birds fighting each other to win that one spot. And you can watch it. You can go sit under that tree and you just see birds swirling around, holding each other by the bodies, by the beaks, pecking at each other. It's incredible. Nobody knows we've been studying that bird for 50 years also, and we still don't know how they find out in the first place that breeder female is dead and there's a vacancy, right? So they are probably constantly nosing around, making sure who's alive. And then, like, if you're in the on the lookout on the housing market, you probably drive around through neighborhoods looking for sale signs, right? So it must be very similar. The sort of analogy for scrub jays is scrub jays are also extremely they also really value their territories. And scrub jays are, again, I don't know if you know, but Florida scrub jays are the most monogamous bird in the world. So even over the crane, yes. So cranes are often what is called serial monogamy. So they are monogamous in a given year, but they might change. Sometimes might change. I mean, if their mate dies, they might have a new mate, etc., etc. But cranes are, of course, a great system. But we have also 50 years of data on scrub jays. So I can tell you that over the last 50 years, and about 4,000 nests in which we know the maternity and paternity of the chicks. So we know who the social father is and who the biological father is. And it's only 1.8% of the time has the biological father not been the social father. And to put that into context with humans have, I think, a 2% per generation extra pair paternity in scientific terms, levels of extra pair paternity, which is crazy because we've seen 1.8% across 14 generations total, 1.8% total. So scrub jays are extremely monogamous. They live in these tight-knit groups. The pair is extremely tight, like closely knit. But when one of those pairs dies, it gets replaced really quickly. And we have no idea. So within days, the widowed bird is paired up with another bird. And we have no idea how they make that decision.
There isn't something out there on eBird that lets them know.
Exactly, probably. So again, what's happening, we think, and again, this is something I want to study, is these helpers. So scrub jays also have helpers, these like grown-up kids that don't have a mate, don't have a territory. These helper scrub jays are probably trap-lining multiple other families every day. And if it's a male scrub jay, he's like making sure all the other males are alive. And then if it's a female scrub jay, they're making sure all the female breeders are alive. And then as soon as those females die or not seen for a few hours sometimes, they'd start and say, hey, Mr. whatever. We've known each other. Yeah, so we've known each other for several days. I grew up in the next territory over. And that's the thing. Most often, these widowed birds are mate, or these helpers move or replace breeders that are at the most 2 territories over. So about 60% of the birds find mates within 500 meters of where they were born. And that's probably because they have to wait for so long, and those breeder vacancies get filled so quickly that they can't really go too far away. It's just energetically impossible. That was like a long diatribe, but that's why I like physiology and birds. Yes?
A follow-up on that.
Uh-huh.
So during this time when everyone is vying for that vacancy,
Yeah.
Do they produce death in these fights?
In acorn woodpeckers, yes. So there is not that we know of. So we know that those fights can get pretty wild, and both males and females will fight their own sex for a breeder vacancy pretty strongly. There's actual physical fighting. I have personally seen acorn woodpeckers with wounds that look like that bird will die. So a broken wing. So it's the acorn woodpecker won't kill it, but it might break a wing during one of those fights, and then a wingless bird is pretty much dead. So they can get fatal injuries at least during those fights. Which one should we take? First one? Our birdhouse, and when you say birdhouses, are these nest boxes where they nest in, right? Yes? Assuming? Yes. Okay. Again, depends on where you are. I think they're a good way to foster, especially if you're living in a suburban or urban environment. I think it's a good way to foster native biodiversity. There's a lot of birds that live in cavities: chickadees, tufted titmice, bluebirds, wrens. They all live in cavities, and so if you're really lucky, you can get an eastern screech owl to live in your bird box. But also flying squirrels live in cavities, and so providing cavities is a nice way, largely because typically cavities are present in dead and dying trees, and in a place with hurricanes, we like to take out those dead and dying trees. And so if you want to provide natural settings for birds that live in cavities, or it could be insects, it could be native bees, a bunch of different types of animals live in cavities, and so putting birdhouses, I think, is a great idea.
Do wood ducks who use cavities, are they going to be displaced by whistling ducks?
That's a great question. I don't know if anyone studied that. I know black-bellied whistling ducks are on the rise, and they are now presumably everywhere. People feed them a lot in their backyards, and yes, so wood ducks are smaller than black-bellied whistling ducks, and so they might go into cavities that are smaller. But again, I don't know their ecologies well enough to know if they're actually competing right now. Typically, what people have done in the past, where they want to increase or they want to decrease the preference of certain bird boxes, is you can just make the cavity smaller, and then the bigger, more dominant bird just can't go in. And yeah, so that's one way of potentially negating black-bellied whistling ducks from using a cavity.
Do you know why black-bellied whistling ducks are on the rise?
No, well, no is, I think, the easiest answer to give. Probably because it's probably a combination of both climate warming and people feeding. I think black-bellied whistling ducks are just more common in suburban areas, so we see them all the time. People feed them a lot, and their numbers are increasing. Every year they're also found further north, which suggests that they're sort of extending their range further north. But like when I used to live in DC, and I used to work at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History before I moved here, and I saw the first black-bellied whistling duck that was seen within DC. So all the birders immediately rushed to see the 3 birds that had suddenly come to what we call the Constitution Ponds. And so they're expanding north every year, which means that their populations, they're sort of responding to climate warming as well. Which is a great segue into the next question, which is, can birds sense incoming bad weather? And so birds use senses which we sort of don't know about, because it's really difficult for us to put ourselves in a bird's brain. We know that birds use sense, sight, smell, sight, and hearing to tell weather conditions. There was a beautiful paper recently on an albatross in the South Oceans, where they showed that albatross actually listen to infrasound, and they are gravitated towards areas with high infrasound. So they love to forage in windy places in the open ocean because they don't have to flap as much. And so they listen for areas or signatures of high waves. And then they start flying in the direction where they can hear high waves. And so birds use a number of different, the other cool thing birds have is they also have this metal called magnetite in their head, which helps them navigate at night. And so magnetite, they often have magnetite deposits. So famously, pigeons have magnetite deposits in their beaks, which is supposed to help them navigate using the Earth's gravitational field. And so we don't sort of know. We know of number of things. So there's again a really fun study on veeries that showed that veeries, the thrush, starts migrating early in years of high hurricane activity. And so they're not actually responding to hurricanes, obviously, because they're migrating before the hurricanes actually happen. So they want to fly across the Gulf of Mexico before hurricanes are even starting. How do they know that? We don't know. But the correlation is pretty strong. The year that there's going to be high hurricane, or we later find out that there's a high hurricane, and then if you go back to the eBird records, you can tell that all the veeries are already left before the hurricanes came. And tsunamis, I don't know, because I don't know how good birds are at detecting earthquakes. And so I think you would require to, again, I don't know if there's an earthquake signature other than seismic tremors that is produced that birds might be sensitive to. So to answer that question, we know that birds do sometimes preventively avoid bad weather, but how they do it, what are the multiple cues that they use to come to those decisions, we don't know. Yes.
When you were talking about the high winds, those offshore winds that they're talking about, would they be attracted to that?
Maybe, yeah. So there might be some relationship between the ocean temperatures and wind activity in the Atlantic in July that is telling the veeries or these migratory birds what routes to take. So yeah, again, a great question. A lot of people are working on it, but I don't think we fully understand how birds make those decisions. What is the best way to? Okay, can you talk about specifics of birdhouses for types of birds, height, spacing? So it sort of depends on the number of cavities that you can put up. It depends on what is your community, right? So if you have a number of birds that like to live in holes, tree holes, then you want to put out more bird boxes. And so if you have woodpeckers, bluebirds, titmice, chickadees, flying squirrels, owls, so that's 7 boxes right there. I'm just kidding. But as long as you draw the photo, put a photo of what you want in there, they'll know. But typically there are two things. So each bird has its own territory, right? So you can put 100 nest boxes for chickadees in your backyard, but only one chickadee pair will breed because they will hold that territory down. They can't. Chickadees will never breed in a communal setting, but purple martins will. So the bigger purple martin house you put in, the more purple martins you will get. So it totally depends on the type of bird you're trying to attract. Sometimes, like I said, you can buy commercially sold birdhouses, make the entrances smaller to sort of avoid getting bigger birds in there. You can sort of keep looking at what birds you're getting. So, for example, house wrens are terrible. they'll go and build over other birds' nests. So they build a stick nest. So chickadees and titmice build moss nests inside the cavity. Wrens build stick nests inside the cavity, and if a wren really likes a cavity, it'll just build over the chickadee nest. And so, because again, that's real estate is in short supply. So you can be as active as taking out sticks that you see. If you see a wren building in your cavity, you can take them out if you want to sort of discourage wrens from using those cavities. So again, totally depends on how you want to utilize or which species you want in your backyard. What is the best way to attract cardinals? Coming from northern eastern North America, I think this is a great question because everyone has so many cardinals in their backyard that we sort of hate cardinals. But cardinals love two things. They love feeders and they love hedges. So cardinals breed in low hedges, and so if you have a nice thick wide hedge, cardinals will love to nest in it. And if you have cardinals in a backyard, I think a combination of feeding and having hedges for them to build their nests in is a great way. And just patience. Do birds use different songs? Yeah, that's a great question. So birds, just like us, have dialects, and bird song varies tremendously, especially for birds that are widely distributed. So a robin that sings in Alaska is singing a very different song than a robin that's singing in Florida. Or there's also temporal cultural shifts. So not only do they have dialects, but they have cultures. So there was another really cool paper in a journal called Current Biology where they studied white-throated sparrows. Does anyone know what a white-throated sparrow sounds like? Is anyone from Canada here? No? White-throated sparrow song is very, very easy to remember. They go, and it's, oh, sweet Canada, 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 Canada. But so that how far the O, how long the O goes, and how many times they say Canada, 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 has changed in the same population based on the males that were singing. So the hypothesis there is there were some males that were singing "Oh Sweet Canada," and in a certain way, and the males that were singing it in a certain way had left behind more offspring, probably because they were more popular with the ladies, who knows, or just by chance, left behind more offspring. And then the daughters of those males started identifying with that type of song as the type of song they were going to choose in their mates. And so you have this cultural shift in the song. So if you listened to a white-throated sparrow in the same location 50 years ago, they are singing a very different song. They were singing a very different song than with what they are singing right now. And so there is a spatio-temporal variation in how birds sing and how many notes they sing, what frequency they sing at. Often birds that sing on the open plain will sing at lower frequencies so their songs travel farther. Birds that live in really dense forests often sing at very high-pitched song because they don't want it to go fast, but there's so much other noise that they want it shriller, higher pitched noises are easier to detect. And the third thing is environmental sound. So we are affecting bird song a lot. So it is shown in house finches, house sparrows, starlings. There are so many examples of birds that have completely changed their song structure based on how much environmental noise there is. So a a village house sparrow sings a different song from an urban house sparrow, because the urban house sparrow has to sing over all the machinery and over all the honking and the car noises and all that. And so they change based on their environmental soundscape, if you may. Yeah.
Why is it that the bigger birds have such a very high pitch, and these little tiny birds, they belt it out? You'd think they were basses or something.
Yeah, so that's again great question. It sort of depends on from species to species, but so for example, wrens produce, like if you've seen Carolina wrens or house wrens, they sing so loudly for such a small bird, right? And that's because they use their song as a weapon. They are trying to show how good of a male they are by singing as loudly. So their surrounding males, and again, they all live in a community. The Carolina wrens will probably know all their neighboring males, and they know who the best male is amongst them. And so there are really cool studies shown, not specifically with Carolina wrens that I know of, but with another bird called a fairy wren in Australia, where they played the songs of a bird that no one had heard of, and immediately the male comes in. But if you play that male his neighbor's song, he's fine. He's like, oh yeah, that's just Larry from there. He's singing, no big deal. And so birds know each other individually just by their song. And so there's a lot of information that's packed into each song. The volume, the length tells not only other males but also other females. So house wrens, for example, they're at the opposite spectrum of monogamy. So like Florida scrub jays are highly monogamous, house wrens are some of the least monogamous birds out there. Exactly. So there are records of up to 60% of the chicks in the nest not being of the social father, of the social mate of that female. So these females are trying to maximize the fitness, presumably they're trying to maximize the fitness of their chicks by mating with the strongest males. And so that's why there is these Carolina wrens are just going off all the time, because
Well, now, if the Carolina wren, if he's so small and he's like, yeah, I'm a big boy on the block, and he comes out really deep with his sound, what about the huge birds that come up with these really high-pitched squeaks? Are they trying to imitate like baby birds or something to get them to squawk out?
so are you saying like cranes screech really loudly, or?
I mean like prey birds.
Oh, like
Some of these hawks and what all.
yes. That's a good question. There are two things. One is the type of sound that you can make is driven by your syrinx, and birds have two syrinxes that go, so they can produce polyphonic sounds, right? And they're sort of constrained by what they can make, and you would have to go back to the last common ancestor of all hawks to find out that they were probably a small bird that had a syrinx for high pitched sound. That's why I'm just hypothesizing, but we sort of don't know why that happens. There are a lot of birds out there that produce very, very low booming sound. So there's a whole family of birds called bustards. What's a common? There's European great bustards in Europe and Kori bustards in Africa, Australian bustards in Australia. They produce this really low, almost infrasonic boom that you can more feel than hear. So if you're, sorry? They're like, so the Australian Kori and Indian bustard can be as tall as 4 feet high, and they are the heaviest flying birds in the world, so they're big birds. But even a great horned owl produces a call that's pretty low in frequency and travels really far. And again, we don't know whether hawks use their calls for territory or whether they're just calling at each other to sort of communicate with each other. Yes?
Are you doing anything for the caracara at Archibald?
Yeah, so we've been studying caracara. They are really beautiful. And so do you know what caracaras are most closely related to? what caracaras are most closely related to? What other birds?
I would say buzzards, hawk, I mean.
Yes, good. Yeah, that would be anyone's guess. Does anyone know?
They're far prettier, but
They are very much prettier. So caracaras belong to the group of birds that includes falcons, so includes kestrels, but kestrels or falconiformes, as ornithologists like to call them, are actually most closely related to parrots. So birds of prey have evolved independently of each other 2 times in the history of birds. Once as what we call accipitriformes, or all the birds of prey that are not falcons. That includes hawks, buzzards, osprey, eagles, hawk eagles, vultures, all vultures, Old World and New World. And then there are the falcons. So they have both evolved very similar morphologies, right? So both a sharp-shinned hawk and a falcon have like a relatively short curved beak. They have long, thin wings to fly through really fast. And so caracaras are most closely related to kestrel in this area. Yeah.
more hawky than buzzardy.
More falcony than buzzardy. So we've been studying caracaras. There's a lady from New Mexico State University, Joan Morrison, who studies buzzards, and she's done really fun work with showing how naturally managed ranch lands are really important for caracaras. And so as we convert habitats, so as we convert ranch lands into, again, cities and or any other land use, we are losing caracaras, because caracaras love to walk around, go through cow pies and eat dung beetles. So they are actually a walking predator more than a flying bird of prey. Yes?
Recently, a large flock of crows.
Mm-hmm.
Are they going north and they're just resting or feeding, or, I mean, there's hundreds of them.
Yeah, in your neighborhood? Yeah. So that's a very common crow behavior in the winter. So you will notice that they sort of dissociate in the spring and summer, but they start coming back in the winter. So crows and ravens do this all over the world. So all kinds of crows, rooks, jackdaws, crows, ravens, they do this all over the world, where a huge number of the young of the year, who are, let's call them juvenile birds, who are adults, who they can fly around, they eat them by themselves, but are extremely inexperienced in feeding. So they don't know where the best garbage dump is, which household puts out the best garbage, or which road kills the most raccoons, or wherever. They don't know where the best feeding opportunities are. And they rely on following other birds to go to places that they have found food the day before. So black vultures, you will see, also start congregating in big groups right now. And actually, if you guys ever drive, so on my drive every day at the intersection of 27 and 70, there is a huge electricity pylon with probably like 500 black vultures that roost there every night. God save the vegetation below it. But so these birds are actually congregating in these big flocks in the winter, because they don't have a nest, and so they don't have to have a territory, and they don't have to raise chicks, and then they rely on each other to find food the next day. So they communicate. They use those roosts, as they're called, as information centers to then follow birds that have known places of good feeding. So crows are extremely social. We since don't fully understand how they do it, but there is pretty good evidence to suggest that these roosts are information centers for young birds who are typically bad at finding their own food. They just follow and mooch off of birds that are good at it.
Are they dangerous? I mean,
No, they're
going to stay where they find food?
They will probably so the roosts will probably again be gone. Oftentimes what will happen is the roosts move over time, and so I would predict that that roost will be gone by December or January. They often move between 2 or 3 different roosts in a year. So,
Theory.
sorry?
I have a theory.
What is it?
There's so many apartment buildings surrounding in an urban area
Yeah.
that their roost has been disturbed. And that maybe they are out there looking for a new roost.
So if they moved into your neighborhood this year, that's possible, but that roost was probably somewhere else, and people didn't like them there, and they were probably shooting at them or something, and so they left that roost. But roosting behavior is very natural. It's not going to affect your life much. They'll probably poop a lot under the tree that they're roosting. Yeah, I'm sure they do, but they will probably move on in a couple of months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm not good at this.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of many things, thousands of things. How do you tell the difference between a crow and a grackle?
A crow is, so there are 2 kinds of crows here. One is a house crow and the other is a fish crow. And then grackles are, and there are 2 types of grackles, boat-tailed grackles and common grackles. Grackles are much smaller, so grackles are starling sized. And
I never knew who was bigger.
yeah, crows are bigger. Did you have to add? Yes.
Our crows. Also, now, our place in Michigan, we have grackles.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the male and females. We have the red-winged blackbird.
Mm-hmm.
And when crows come into the area, they tend to chase them away.
Yeah.
Do the crows go after their young?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Crows were like really smart. Yeah.
they're not eating just the roadkill. They're
No.
going after
Live kill.
Yeah, exactly. So crows and a lot of other animals are constantly watching other birds all the time. And I'm sure a grackle will take a red-winged blackbird chick also if it got the chance to. And so blue jays, for example, eat a lot of babies of other birds. And again, like one myth sort of I've heard this multiple times, that's why I'm mentioning this. People call like, oh, it's a bird eating a bird. It's like, why are they so cannibalistic? But you have to imagine that a blue jay eating a grackle baby is the same as us eating a cow. They're as evolutionarily, genetically distinct from each other as us from goats or us from cows. So they're completely, the last common ancestor was probably like 40 million years ago. But birds birds not only know their individual neighbors, but they know behaviors. They know birds will track other birds with food in their mouth. So a great way that hawks will actually find nests, they will actually just watch a bird with food in its mouth and watch where it goes, and then go there and sit again and see that bird come in to feed its chicks again, and then okay, that's the nest, let me go get it. So cuckoos or cowbirds, for example, here in the US, brown-haired cowbirds will watch birds with nesting material in their mouth. So they know that this bird is building a nest, and cowbirds, as many of you know, I'm sure, are what are called brood parasites. So they will go and lay their eggs in the nests of other birds. And both cowbirds, so counting has evolved at least twice, if not thrice, in birds. And they can't count to double digits, but they can count at least to probably 7 or 8. Because both cowbirds and cuckoos, what they do, Eurasian cuckoos, so these are old world cuckoos, they will lay an egg and then eat or eject one egg. Because if the female comes back and she had laid only 2 eggs and she finds 3 eggs, she's like, uh-oh, this is not my egg. Who else wants to raise wants me to raise their nest? And so they will not only, so cuckoos not only mimic the eggs, and cuckoos and cowbirds both mimic the eggs of their hosts, as they're called, because they're parasites. So the but they will also take out the egg. The other, so cuckoos have learned how to count, their hosts have learned how to count, cowbirds and their hosts have learned to count. There's another really cool study from Europe where migrating flycatchers will go into the nest boxes or nesting cavities of chickadees and look at how many eggs the female chickadee has laid to guess how good the habitat is. So they will preferentially nest in areas where chickadees are laying big clutches because they know it's good habitat. So it's called heterospecific attraction. And so yeah, birds are smarter than we think. Yes.
Wondering, I read that, I don't know if it's true, that crows have funerals.
So a funeral is I don't know how you define a funeral, but animals, sure. So animals are known to congregate around dead conspecifics, so other members of their species, and elephants are known to do that, and primates are known to do that. Crows are also extremely intelligent and social birds, and I wouldn't be so. What is the emotion behind that is difficult to tell, again, because it's difficult to test. But yes, they do congregate around dead crows. We don't know if it's because they are sad or if they are trying to understand what killed that bird, or they might be there to usurp its territory now that it's gone, right? So there might be multiple birds that are coming there. So we don't know what the motive is, but we do know that they do at least find out what's happening in their neighborhood.
They're usually very vocal.
Yes, they are. So crows especially are very vocal, and it does look like they're having a funeral. But yeah, we don't know if they're saying good things or bad things about the dead crow. Probably a mixture of both. But yeah. Yes.
The white cowbirds, you see them go up to a bush and they're looking for the lizards. And their long necks, they're kind of doing this. What does that do as far as, a lot of times they'll catch you.
Yeah. So so both cattle egrets, great egrets do that, and I'm guessing you're saying egrets. So where are your eyes on your head? In the front, right? Where are the cattle egret's eyes on its head? On the side. So exactly. So it's basically focusing on one place. And not only is that's important for two reasons. One is they have to form an image in front of them, which they can't see normally, right? They are seeing out this way. A lot of birds, I don't know egret specifically, are either right-eyed or left-eyed. So they often use one eye to see close things and another eye to see far off things. And this was really put into great focus by especially in the north, there's an epidemic of a bacterium called Mycoplasma gallisepticum, which causes this conjunctivitis in house finches. And so birds that were right-eyed were getting conjunctivitis in their right eye because they were feeding with their right eye looking at the food. So it depends if they're using their right eye or their left eye for the close part of their vision. And so it might be that egret is like going back and forth between focusing with its right eye and left eye to finally decide how far to strike.
So I have a feeling we could go on all day with the audience. But if you want to wrap it up with those
Sure.
questions up there quickly, and we'll...
Do whooping cranes typically remain with one breeding partner? If yes, so I'm sure you're probably talking about the whooping crane that's in this area. I don't know if it's still around. Yes, if whoever asked this question.
They moved the ones from Babson Park.
There was one on what is it called, Boneyard Road or Backbone Road? There we go. Did they move that bird?
Yeah.
Okay, because it looked pretty sad, but they do, yes. So cranes are highly monogamous, and but at the same time, like any other animal, there will be divorces within pairs. That's actually very, very common. Happens all the time in scrub jays as well. And so if they seek another partner, if there dies, how long might it take to replace? It totally depends on so cranes, sandhill cranes have been studied a lot because they're much more numerous. And we know that sandhill cranes start forming relationships with other sandhill cranes, especially of the opposite sex, on their wintering grounds. So they will, I don't know what happens with this resident Floridanus subspecies of sandhill cranes, but the sandhill cranes that live out west, they start making those connections and start sort of gauging the attractiveness of a partner on the wintering grounds, and then they all fly back together, and some of them fly back together with their new partners. And so if whooping cranes are also highly migratory, and so if whooping cranes, or at least again a huge chunk of their population is migratory, although I think they were resident in Florida as well. There was a whooping, I don't know, I'm not sure. Sandhill cranes are resident. But I don't know if there was a whooping crane population that was like pre-1900s. That was, yeah. So if the partner dies in winter, it might take until next breeding season for that bird to start breeding with a new bird again. And unfortunately, with whooping cranes, totally also depends on how many other birds there are. They're a highly, highly endangered bird. It might not have a lot of options, not a lot of opposite sex birds that are of the right age to mate with. So how will they study birds from the International Space Station? That's a great question. So there are now these tags that you can deploy on birds that are about robin sized and bigger. They're called satellite tags, and you can track birds live using satellites. So the International Space Station has a little module in it which is picking up signals of these birds as they move. And the International Space Station is going around the Earth, and so it can track the signals wherever it catches it, right? So there are birds, for example, that live, there's a tremendous, like one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my life is this migration of a bird called the Amur falcon. So Amur falcons breed in northeastern China and winter in South Africa. So they fly all the way from northeastern China down to Namibia and South Africa. And they do these staging behaviors where they congregate in huge numbers in northeastern India, where I'm originally from. I'm not from northeastern, but I'm from India. So last year, finally, after 10 years of somebody finding this big roost of Amur falcons, I got to go there, and there were like 200,000 Amur falcons like on a river island. It was an incredible sight. And so it's very difficult to have a technology where you can live track animals as they go these huge distances across the earth. And having something on a satellite is the best way to do it. So.
All right, one final question.
All right.
Okay.
There we go. What can we do in our backyards to help the bird population?
Great question. So I think feeding birds is not bad. We've ruined enough bird habitat around the world that we can feed some birds and help them live. Putting up water when it comes up, putting out bird boxes, bird houses when they come up, planting native vegetation as much as possible. So for example, hummingbirds probably are much more adapted to seeking wild native flowers than they are to seeking ornamental flowers. So planting native plants that have many more insects on them that the birds can feed on is really good. So having as much natural vegetation in your backyard is good. If you live in a community where there's a dead tree that's not threatening any houses around, keeping that dead tree instead of cutting it down, if you're chopping down big branches, leaving branches that clearly have big holes. The bigger the hole, the rarer it is. So if you want something like hawks or owls to breed in them, then you want bigger holes, and bigger holes are rarer. And finally, if you are sort of quote unquote managing your backyard for with feeders and with bathhouses, it is a little bit on you to keep track of if there are any diseases going around. So Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission and a lot of NGOs, Audubon, local Audubon societies will tell you if there is, for example, a bird flu epidemic going through. So there's a bird flu epidemic, bird flu scare at least. It didn't, thankfully didn't convert to an epidemic here, but there was bird flu reported from northern Florida, and we adapted a lot of our research techniques to making sure that we are not spreading bird flu for the birds that we handle. And so keeping an eye and ear out for if there are any epidemics out there right now. If there is an ongoing epidemic, probably not feeding the birds, because multiple different species come into close contact with each other and can contaminate each other when they're at a feeder or in a bath. So being a little proactive about making sure you're not the cause of some harm is, yeah.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.